The Thanksgiving table is full of chatter and clinking glasses, yet one chair, meant for the eldest daughter, remains glaringly empty. Though the house was alive with laughter, the memory of last year's quarrel about money still lingered like smoke that clung to the drapes. Whispers passed between cousins, and more than one uncle shook his head, as though predicting another eruption before the night was done. The goal of this chapter was clear: to set the stage for fractured loyalties, to expose the cold favoritism that had pushed a daughter to the edges of her own family, and to hint that deeper betrayals lay waiting in silence. The suburban home was dressed in autumn splendor. Orange and gold wreaths framed the door. The scent of roast turkey and nutmeg filled the air, and the polished dining room table gleamed beneath a chandelier that had witnessed decades of family gatherings. Outside, the November wind rattled the bare branches, but inside warmth battled uneasily with tension. The daughter, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her sweater, walked in to the murmured acknowledgement of relatives. Her mother, bright with a hostess's false cheer, greeted her with a kiss on the cheek that was both quick and distant. The stepfather stood at the head of the table, speaking proudly of business ventures and holiday plans. His children beamed beneath his words, basking in attention. Only the quiet aunt, seated near the end, offered the daughter a look that held both sorrow and support. At first, the evening unfolded with brittle politeness. The turkey was carved, plates filled, glasses raised. But when conversation turned to private schools, country clubs, and new vacation homes, the daughter's comments about her classes or books fell like pebbles into a roaring river herd, perhaps, but quickly swept aside. She sat straighter, trying to keep her smile, even as her throat ached with unshed words. Then came the toast. Her stepfather rose, glass high, his voice warm and commanding. To new beginnings, to the children who make us proud, and to the future we are building together. His eyes swept across his children, his wife, the cousins. But not once did they rest on the daughter. Glasses clinked, cheers filled the room, and she lifted her own with forced steadiness, though her chest tightened with each swallow. Her mother caught her gaze, only for a moment, and looked away as though the exclusion were nothing more than an oversight. The aunt's hand twitched, as if she might protest, but she stayed silent, trapped by the weight of tradition and fear of open conflict. The daughter's heart pounded in her ears. She told herself she would not cry, not here, not in front of them. The meal resumed, laughter louder now, conversation circling ever tighter around the favored children. She cut her turkey into precise, unnecessary pieces, tasting nothing. Around her, plates clattered, silverware scraped, pumpkin pie cooled on the sideboard, and cousins darted through the hallway. Yet for her, the noise only emphasized the hollow absence of belonging. When her plate was cleared, she reached to fold her napkin and froze. Tucked beneath her plate, half hidden by the linen edge, lay a sealed envelope. Its surface was unmarked, yet it seemed to radiate weight far heavier than paper should bear. With a glance around the table, she slipped it into her lap, her pulse quickening. The chatter continued, no one noticing, or perhaps choosing not to. She excused herself softly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. As she rose, her aunt looked at her with questioning eyes, but said nothing. In her hand, hidden by the folds of her sweater, the envelope felt like a secret pressed against her very skin. As the daughter lowered her glass, she noticed a sealed envelope tucked under her platé letter, not meant for her. The daughter slipped away from the noise of the dining room to the upstairs guest room, clutching the mysterious envelope. Her footsteps felt unnaturally loud against the staircase, each creak a reminder that discovery might come at any moment. As she entered the room and shut the door softly behind her, she could still hear the murmur of laughter and clinking silverware from below, a cruel contrast to the storm rising within her. For a moment she hesitated, staring at the plain envelope as if it might burn her fingers. She remembered a night not long ago when she overheard her mother whisper in the hallway, "She doesn't need to know everything. The words had gnawed at her since then, but now, with this envelope in her hand, the meaning seemed suddenly clearer. Secrets had been locked away, and this fragile slip of paper might hold their key. Her chest tightened as she tore the seal and unfolded the letter. Numbers and signatures covered the page financial records, details of payments, and official notations she could only half understand. Yet one fact leapt at her. Her father's name, repeated again and again, tied to regular support she had been told never existed. Her knees nearly gave way. For years her mother had painted a picture of a man who had vanished, a man unwilling to provide or even call. But here, in stark black ink, was proof that he had been present all along, silenced not by absence, but by deception. The room itself seemed to shift around her. Lace curtains stirred faintly in the cold November air. On the dresser sat old photographs of her childhood, her gap-toothed smile beaming up from frames coated with dust. Where once these images had been comforting, they now seemed like evidence in a trial snapshots of a little girl raised on lies. Downstairs, the laughter swelled, a hollow music. She pressed the letter against her chest, fighting the urge to scream. Her mother was downstairs serving pie as if nothing were amiss, as if betrayal had not been simmering for years. A soft knock jolted her. "Everything all right?" It was her aunt's voice, kind but probing. Panic surged through her veins. She shoved the papers back into the envelope and slid it beneath a pillow just before the door handle turned. Her aunt peeked in, smiling faintly. "You've been gone a while, dear. Your mother was asking." The daughter forced a smile, muttering something about needing air. The aunt lingered, eyes searching hers as though she sensed more. But after a pause, she withdrew, closing the door with a click. The daughter sank onto the edge of the bed, pressing her trembling hands together. The revelation struck her like a stone. Her childhood belief that her father had abandoned her was a lie carefully constructed. The betrayal was not just financial, it was emotional. A rewriting of history that had stolen from her the chance to know one of her parents. A sudden noise pulled her to the window. She parted the curtain and peered down into the driveway. There, in the dim light of the porch lamps, her stepfather moved swiftly, loading suitcases into the trunk of his car. On a Thanksgiving night, while the house filled with relatives and chatter, he was preparing for something secretive, something that had no place for her. Her breath caught, fogging the cold glass. The letter in the pillow behind her suddenly felt like both a weapon and a shield. If her father had not vanished, if support had always been there, then the web of deceit was far wider than she had dared imagine. The suitcase in the driveway was not simply luggage, it was a sign that a plan was already in motion, a plan meant to erase her. From the window, she saw her stepfather quietly loading luggage into the car on Thanksgiving night. In the dead of night, the daughter overhears hushed voices in the kitchen, her mother and stepfather arguing. The sound rose faintly through the stillness of the house, like embers crackling in a dying fire. She froze halfway down the hall, the letter she had hidden earlier still burning in her memory. Those whispered words, half audible, twisted with the echo of a moment months ago, when she had caught only fragments. She'll never find out. Now the words carried weight that pressed against her chest. She crouched low, her bare feet cool against the linoleum, as she edged closer to the glow spilling from beneath the kitchen door. Her heart pounded like a drum. This night was not meant for slumber, it was meant to reveal what had long been hidden. Her entire body seemed tuned to their voices, each syllable stabbing deeper into the fragile trust she still clung to. The goal of this moment became undeniable. To pull the veil back entirely, to confront the betrayal head-on, to discover just how much of her life had been manipulated by the people who were supposed to protect her. The kitchen looked different at night. Only a single lamp over the sink illuminated the counters, casting shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the floor. Half-eaten pie plates sat abandoned beside the coffee pot, which had been left to stew too long, filling the air with a bitter scent. The ordinary intimacy of late-night leftovers was warped by the intensity of the conversation. Her mother's voice trembled. She asks too many questions. She's growing suspicious. Her stepfather's reply was colder, harder. It doesn't matter. We have the paperwork. The trust fund is safe. Once her name is gone from the documents, there's nothing she can do. The daughter's breath caught. A trust fund? Her name erased? The revelation sliced through her like glass. All the years of being told she was a burden, of being left out of toasts, of wearing hand-me-downs while others shone in new clothes, it had been part of something far greater. Not only had she been abandoned emotionally, she was being cut away legally, financially, deliberately. She could not bear it another second. With a burst of reckless courage, she pushed the door open. The sharp creak cut through their words, and both heads snapped up in shock. Her mother's face paled, while her stepfather's eyes narrowed into something close to contempt. "What are you talking about?" Her voice cracked, but it carried across the room. "What trust fund? What papers?" Her mother rose quickly, hands fluttering. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be up. You're tired, confused." "Don't lie to me again," the daughter shouted, her voice shaking but strong. She felt years of silenced questions pouring out. "You've been keeping secrets my entire life. You lied about my father. You lied about money, and now you're trying to erase me from this family altogether." The stepfather slammed his fist on the table, silverware rattling from the impact. "Enough," he barked. His tone was absolute, final. "She doesn't belong to this family anymore." The words echoed in the dim kitchen, searing themselves into her heart. Her mother flinched but said nothing, caught between loyalty and fear. Tears blurred the daughter's vision, but rage steadied her body. She could not stay in that room another moment. She ran down the hallway, her breath ragged, her mind spinning. When she reached her bedroom, she yanked the door open and froze. There, at the foot of her bed, sat her suitcase. It was already zipped, packed with her belongings. Someone had been in her room, preparing for her removal before she even knew it. She stumbled back against the doorframe, staring in disbelief. The betrayal was no longer hidden in whispers or buried in ledgers. It stood in front of her in canvas and zippers, undeniable and chilling. When she opens the door, she finds her suitcase already packed by someone else. The front doorbell rings just as dawn breaks. Standing there is the daughter's estranged father, summoned at last. The sound of the chime seemed to split the heavy silence that had settled over the house after a sleepless night. She had spent hours staring at the packed suitcase by her bed, her mind a whirlwind of anger and fear. That knock-sharp deliberate was both terrifying and strangely comforting, as if fate itself had answered her questions. Her mind flashed to a memory long buried, the steady hands that had once guided her bicycle down a suburban sidewalk, her laughter rising as she wobbled forward. That man, her father, had been absent for so long that her mother's refrain, "He walked away," had hardened into fact. Yet here he was, standing on the threshold, face lined by years she had not shared, eyes dark with urgency. This was the moment she had longed for and dreaded in equal measure. The chapter's purpose was no longer hidden. It was time to expose lies, to measure the truth against the deception that had shaped her childhood, and to begin the fight for something resembling justice. The living room still bore the scars of last night's argument. Empty glasses sat askew on the coffee table, napkins crumpled and tossed aside. The Thanksgiving centerpiece, once proud with orange leaves and candles, now leaned sideways, a casualty of careless hands. Light seeped through the blinds, illuminating the clutter in pale gold. She stepped into the room cautiously, every muscle taut. Her mother appeared from the kitchen, her face stiff, painted with a hostess's mask that no longer fit. The stepfather loomed near the hearth, jaw clenched, posture bristling at the intrusion. At the center of it all, the father stood in his coat, carrying not just a leather briefcase but the weight of years denied. The aunt lingered by the window, her presence quiet, her eyes watchful. "I came for her," the father said, his voice firm, cutting through the tension like a blade. He set the briefcase on the table and flipped it open with deliberate calm. Inside lay neat stacks of papers, each bound with clips, each bearing official stamps and signatures. The daughter's eyes scanned the documents. She saw her own name again and again, tied to deposits and records of support. Letters, written in a familiar hand, addressed to Here H, never delivered. Her chest tightened as she traced the loops of his penmanship, imagining birthdays and holidays when these words had been waiting for her in vain. "You lied to me," she whispered, turning toward her mother. "All these years, you said he abandoned me. You said he gave nothing." Her mother's lips parted, words failing her for once. The stepfather's glare hardened, but even he seemed unsettled by the evidence piled high before them. The father's gaze softened as it met hers. "I never stopped fighting to see you. She built walls higher than I could climb, but I never stopped trying." The daughter's throat burned. The enormity of it all pressed down until she burst, her voice rising in a cry that shook the room. "You lied to me about everything. My whole life was built on your lies." Her mother flinched, her hands trembling, but no denial came. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The father reached again into his briefcase and withdrew one final envelope, sealed with the mark of the court. He laid it on the table, his hand steady. "I am done waiting for her permission. I have already filed for custody." The words hung in the air, too sharp to ignore, too final to take back. The father produces a sealed court order. He has already filed for custody. The daughter, flanked by her father and attorney, steps back into the house she once called home, ready to collect her belongings. The November air outside still clung to her skin, sharp and bracing, but inside the air felt even colder, heavy with ghosts of years when she had tried to belong. She paused in the foyer, the same polished tiles greeting her feet, yet everything looked altered. What had once been familiar now seemed foreign, every framed photograph and polished banister carrying a weight of exclusion. She remembered the suitcase she had found packed days before, the silent evidence that her removal had already been planned. The echo of that discovery whispered in her mind. She was not leaving by choice. She had been erased in advance. Now she had returned with purpose, determined to choose what would remain hers, and to uncover whatever truths the house still hid. The setting was pristine as ever, the mansion gleaming with quiet affluence. Trophies and certificates lined the hallway, each inscribed with the names of her stepfather's children. Their photographs smiling on tennis courts, at debate tournaments, at piano recitals were carefully displayed along the stairwell. Her own image was absent, as though she had never existed. Her father moved beside her, protective yet measured, his presence both comforting and unfamiliar in this place that had rejected him. The attorney, composed and precise, carried a folder tucked under her arm. They all knew this was more than a retrieval. It was an excavation of lies. The daughter climbed the stairs and opened the door to her bedroom. The smallest room at the end of the hall, it looked stark compared to the lavish spaces she had passed. Plain bedding, modest furniture, and bare walls stood in stark contrast to her siblings' decorated quarters. Her breath caught as she realized how little of her identity had ever been permitted here. She began to pack. Clothes folded into boxes, books stacked with care, school papers gathered. Her father helped silently, his expression tightening as he saw how little she had been given. Then her hand brushed against the back of the closet. Hidden behind a row of shoes, bound with a rubber band, was a stack of envelopes. Her heart stuttered as she recognized her name written in her father's handwriting. With shaking hands, she tore one open. A birthday card, her 13th. Inside, a gift card and words brimming with love words she had never read. One after another, she opened them, each envelope a reminder that her father had not forgotten her. Her mother had kept them hidden, evidence of years of deliberate cruelty. Tears streaked her cheeks as she clutched the stack to her chest. "She told me you stopped caring," she whispered, looking at her father. His eyes glistened, and he reached for her hand. Never, not for a single day. Compelled by something fierce, she crossed the hall into her mother's office. The attorney nodded, reminding her that documents pertaining to her were hers to claim. She pulled open drawers and sifted through files. There they were: financial records, court filings, proofs of support her father had provided. The evidence was undeniable, page after page showing her mother's deception. Among them was a draft letter, clinical in its wording, reducing her to a complication in the pursuit of a wealthy marriage. By late afternoon, boxes filled the hall, movers carrying the last of her belongings to the truck outside. The daughter sat on her stripped bed, pen in hand, writing the letter she had rehearsed in her heart for days. She wrote of betrayal, of lies, of the pain, of being treated as baggage rather than a child. She ended with quiet resolve. She was leaving not for revenge but for survival, because she deserved to be wanted. She placed the letter on the bare mattress, the house key beside it, symbols of a bond broken beyond repair. As she turned to leave, the alarm suddenly blared. The shrill sound echoed through the empty halls. She froze, her pulse racing. Through the window, headlights swung across the driveway. Her mother's SUV was pulling in, returning days earlier than expected. As they exit, the security alarm blares. The mother's SUV is pulling into the driveway days earlier than expected. The front gate camera shows the mother storming toward the door, her sunglasses pushed into her hair, fury in every step. The intercom buzzed with her voice, sharp and insistent, demanding to be let inside. The daughter stood frozen in her father's glass-walled living room, the ocean stretching beyond the cliffs below, her heart pounding with the same dread she had felt that day at the airport. But this time, she would not be the one abandoned. She could still hear the echo of her mother's shrug, the feel of $200 pressed into her hand, and the way her name had been stripped from toasts, from records, from love. That memory gave her strength now, as the shadows of dawn lengthened across the polished floor. The goal was plain. Tonight would bring confrontation to its fullest height. Justice, truth, and painful loyalty would clash until there could be no more silence. The house was quiet except for the waves breaking below the cliff and the crackle of a low fire in the hearth. The scent of salt air drifted through the open balcony door, mixing with the faint aroma of tea left untouched on the coffee table. It was a sanctuary of calm, but the pounding at the gate promised nothing but upheaval. The daughter straightened her shoulders as her father entered, firm but calm, his presence like an anchor. The attorney sat nearby, her notes organized, eyes watchful. The mother's voice came again, louder, desperate. At a nod from her father, the gate opened. She swept into the room, expensive sundress clinging to her frame, her expression caught between outrage and relief. "Blanche," she cried, using her daughter's name like an incantation. "Thank God. Come home with me. We can fix this." The daughter took a step back. Her voice, though trembling, carried through the air. "You left me. At the airport. You lied to me about everything. And I found the letters. Every single one you hid." The mother's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the attorney, then to the father, before hardening again. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do. You don't know what it was like, raising you alone while I sent support every month." The father cut in evenly. "More than the court asked. And you spent it on yourself while she believed you were struggling." The mother's voice rose, brittle, breaking under the weight of truth. "I sacrificed everything for her." The daughter's throat tightened as she recalled the suitcase waiting by her bed. "You sacrificed me. Not for security, but for him. For Richard. You treated me like baggage." Her mother faltered, but then pressed forward, her voice cracking with panic. "I was afraid of losing him. afraid of being nothing. I thought you'd understand. The father leaned forward, voice low but cutting. What you did was not fear. It was abandonment. He pushed the stack of evidence across the table. The letters, the records, the drafts. Papers that no longer allowed denial. The mother's breath came ragged now, her hands trembling as she tried to push them away. But the weight of her daughter's eyes kept her pinned. The girl who had once been silenced now spoke with clarity. I will not let you rewrite my life. Choose where I belong now. The room seemed to still, the crash of the ocean rising to fill the silence that followed. The mother's face contorted, torn between pleading and rage. And then, as though the words had been ripped from her throat, she whispered a warning, trembling but laced with venom. You'll regret this, he'll come after you both. As court proceedings loom, the mother breaks down and whispers, You'll regret this, he'll come after you both. In the end, the story of betrayal and redemption closes like the final page of a heavy family album. The daughter who was once silenced found her voice, and with it uncovered truths long buried beneath lies. Her courage proved that loyalty, when betrayed, can still be reclaimed through justice and truth. Families are meant to be sanctuaries, yet sometimes those we trust most become the ones who wound us most deeply. Still, the heart longs for honesty, for a place where love is not conditional but constant. The father's return showed that true devotion never dies, even when hidden behind walls of deceit. The mother's choices revealed how greed and fear can twist love into something unrecognizable. And yet, through the pain, came clarity. Family is not about wealth or appearances, but about those who choose to stay, to fight, and to protect. The betrayal was cruel, but the justice that followed gave dignity back to the one who had been cast aside. This tale reminds us that secrets fester in silence, but when brought to light, they lose their power. Revenge may spark from anger, but in the end, it is truth and accountability that restore balance. For every photograph missing from the wall, there is a memory rebuilt in honesty. For every empty chair at the table, there is the chance to fill it with those who truly care. Loyalty is not measured in words but in actions, and betrayal always reveals the character of those who commit it. True justice is not only in the courtroom, but also in the peace that comes from knowing one's worth. Redemption may arrive late, but when it does, it shines brighter than the lies that tried to smother it. Families fracture, but they can also be redefined by choice, by love, and by truth. The philosophy remains. Betrayal wounds, but loyalty heals. If you found meaning in this story, leave a simple number 1 in the comments to show your support. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel to hear the next story of family, secrets, and justice waiting to be revealed.